Hi, this is Eric Black. I'm recording for my CIT 260 final presentation on the Oregon Trail game we developed using the Java programming language. I'll go ahead and get started by talking about static versus non-static variables. The static variable is constant. The memory is allocated for the variable only once when the class is loaded, and the allocated memory is shared with all instances of the class. A static variable is global to the entire class and can be referenced directly through the class. You do not have to declare a reference to the object like you do with non-static variables. A non-static variable is changeable. Each object has its own copy of the non-static variable, and that requires that an object instance, where in this non-static variable as well, a variable can only be referenced through an instance of the object. As you can see here, you have an object reference dot variable name. We see similar differences in static and non-static functions or methods. Over here I have in the location control class a method called nextView that is static. The nextView looks through the locations and moves the player through to the next location in view. This is then called in certain views, as you can see here at the bottom of the screen, and it is referenced by a direct reference to the location control class. With a non-static function, as you can see here, the function calcBarrelVolume calculates the volume of a barrel, is called by a reference to a new barrel volume control object. Only through the object calcBarrel function can I then call the method of calcBarrelVolume. Next I'll go over my examples of using an array, an ArrayList, and an enum. So an array I used when I was creating the locations in the map control. Here I create an array of location of an array of type location. It is a two-dimensional array, and I used an array for this because I needed it to be an array of the same data type. The next example that we have is of an array list of type inventory. And we used an array list for this because the list needed to have, inside of the array, we needed to have different types of data. We needed to have a type, an amount, and an amount needed. And so we have both a string and two integers. And you can only have different data types in an array list. And then for an enum, as you can see at the bottom here, we have an enum of item types. We did this because item types can be an enum. You can reference the items in the array by a direct reference to their name. Enums are constants; they can never change, which is another reason that we used it as an item type. Next, I'll go over how I used a for loop to create the locations. And here, I use this for loop to loop through the amount of rows and columns set previously in the game. I use this outer for loop to go through each number of row, and then for each row, for example, a row, if I were looping through the first time, it'd be an index of 0. On that 0 column, or that 0 row, I would then go to the next dimension of the array, where we go into this inner for loop, and add columns for up until the number of columns is maxed out. And then once that completes the first round, it then loops and goes, and then the outer for loop is then incremented, and it continues out until we reach the max amount of rows and columns. And in each time that goes through, we create a new object location, or new object of type location. Next, I'll be going over runtime errors. These are fascinating to me. I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to do that this semester. Here we see an example of a function, where I used a barrel volume calc exception. As we go through here, we set parameters if the input is less than 1 or input is greater than 60, it throws this exception. And then we go through for each, and the same is true for each of these. We see this in the actual method down here at the bottom right. This is copied from our code. When I implement this calc barrel volume function, we must try the radius and make sure that it is not in error. If it, as you can see here, if the radius is less than 1 or greater than 18, it will throw an exception and will cause the user to re-enter the radius. Now I'd like to go over a byte versus a character stream. In a byte stream, it can only read or write in ASCII characters, binary data 1 byte at a time. And this is only 8-bit. A character stream, on the other hand, is much more flexible. It can write in the 8-bit ASCII or 16-bit Unicode. This is an example where we write to an external file using a method of print characters. We open the file stream using print writer. We then print the necessary report using a for loop going through each of the characters, listing their name and their description. The stream file is then closed by using the outfile.close method. Now let's go over the actual game. I have now here pulled up our working game of Oregon Trail. We first see this display banner that lets you know what's going on in the game and that you're preparing to set off on the Oregon Trail. We press C to continue, are then brought to the main menu where we can then begin a new game. I'll enter my name. A user of Eric is then created, and we at first see a map of the game with an indicator here that shows us where our location is. We are now at location 1, which is Independence, Missouri. According to the map, we see that we have 25 locations that takes us all the way to the end of Oregon City, Oregon. We have a message that tells us what location we're at Independence, Missouri. I then have the option to continue. And let's examine the trading post. We can buy supplies by entering the amount of supplies that we need. A receipt is then printed, and then we have the opportunity to continue moving on the trail. And then we take us to the next location, which is Kansas City, Missouri, and then we'll continue on the trail to preserve time. We'll show the hunt functionality here. We're pressing shoot. Before we can shoot the animal, we need to solve a math problem. We do that by specifying the amount that our bullets cost and the tax and calculating the price after tax. I did this very simply so that we could get through the game more quickly. Oh, and of course I must do that one more time. Perfect. We'll then continue through the game. We now have to do a complex equation where we calculate the amount of meat shares that's left over from our meat that we just collected. So we'll enter the weight of the meat, the number of children in our wagon, and the number of adults. I have pre-calculated this amount for going through the game easy. Okay, that brings us to the next location, Little Blue River, Nebraska, and we'll continue to move on our journey. Okay, we're at Grand Island until we get to the barrel volume calculation, in which case we must answer another complex math equation, where we enter the height and the radius of the barrel. I've predetermined the answer to the calculation so that we can continue moving forward through the game. We then continue moving forward at a rapid pace so that we can see what the end of the game looks like. We have multiple options to rest and to look around throughout the game. We're now in Wyoming. We're making great time on the Oregon Trail. We'll keep moving forward. We are now in Idaho. There are a few stops along the way in Idaho. I thought this was very fascinating to look up all the stops because these are places that I drive by quite frequently on my way down to Utah. We pass by American Falls, then we go to Twin Falls, Fort Boise. We have just a few more, now we're in Oregon. And just a few more until we reach the end of the trail. Congratulations, we made it to Oregon. We are one of the survivors of the Oregon Trail. That is all for my presentation. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a wonderful class. I hope you have a good break and Merry Christmas.